Wonderful.
Well, hi. Thank you for
Hello.
coming today.
Thank you for having me. Happy to do it.
Yeah, of course. So, to get started, do you want to give a brief introduction of who you are and then also talk about where we are today?
Absolutely. So, I am Patrick Tyrrell, and I am the Director of Habitat Restoration and Upper Education for Friends of Ballona Wetlands. We are here today at the Ballona Freshwater Marsh. This is a unique part of the Ballona Wetlands ecosystem, referred to as the Greater Ballona Wetlands. It's the only part of the wetlands that has undergone a full-scale restoration process. So it's a restored marsh that was constructed about a little over 20 years ago now. So it was a former, kind of the history here behind us is this was part of the wetlands historically, and then it was converted into farmland. It was lima beans and celery fields for decades.
Oh,
And then about a little over 20 years ago, it was restored back into a wetland. So it's a great kind of example of the power of the habitat restoration process in terms of bringing these ecosystems back and breathing new life into areas that have been harmed by human activities.
yeah, awesome. I guess that segues well into the question of what types of issues have these wetlands faced in the past
Mm.
and which ones have been beaten and what are now the primary concerns.
Sure. Well, gosh, we like to say that Ballona, like many of our wetlands in California and throughout the world, it's kind of had the whole kitchen sink thrown at it in terms of impacts. I would say that it's a particularly heightened here because of how urbanized Los Angeles is. So
Mhm.
just the history of urbanization in Los Angeles. Um, there's just been a tremendous amount of human impacts. So the kind of the main issues historically, it's everything and anything. So it's been, the roads and the highways that have been cut through the wetlands. It's the loss of habitat. So we've lost about 2/3 of what we know was here historically to development, to urbanization, agriculture, ranching, oil extraction. On and on and on. But kind of if we, sort of boil it down to two issues, the primary issues that we're still kind of legacy issues that we're still dealing with today are the constraints to Ballona Creek. So the Ballona Creek levees, which were built in the 20s and 30s, and limit the amount of connection between the land and the water. Right, it
Mhm.
really restricts the hydrology and has caused a lot of the wetlands to not really function in terms of being wetlands, right?
Right.
They're sort of the floodplain is there, but it no longer floods. um, so you have that, still to this day is a major constraint on the function of the wetlands and the health of the wetlands. And then the other big issue, kind of legacy issue, was the filling of a large part of the wetlands during the construction of Marina del Rey. So that was a big part of the wetlands that was destroyed back in the 50s and 60s. It was converted from wetlands into a harbor or a marina. But in the process of doing that, they were dredging and excavating sediments, essentially lowering the land in order to create a harbor.
Mhm.
And then they were uh, basically dumping that sediment that was excavated to fill on top of other parts of the wetlands. So there's a big portion of the reserve today that's about 15 feet above where it was historically.
Whoa.
So you have a situation where the water is still where the water is, but the land is now 15 feet higher.
Higher. Yeah.
And so as a result, it has lost a lot of its functions. So those are kind of the big human impacts that we're still hoping to address,
Mhm.
someday with more restoration work.
Yeah, and with all of these issues that it's faced, obviously Friends of Iona exists to protect what's left and try
Mm.
and bring some of that back to what it was before and serve the purpose that it served before.
Mm-hmm.
And with wetlands and Biona, what is so important about that ecosystem to this area,
Mm-hmm.
whether for nature or for people?
Yeah. So we love to talk about the services, the ecosystem services that wetlands provide. Right.
Mm-hmm.
They are some of the most critical ecosystems on the planet, some of the most productive ecosystems on the planet. So we really have taken them for granted for most of human history, and it's only been in very recent human history where we've recognized these incredible services that they're providing. So they
Mm-hmm.
are hotspots of biodiversity. So they have all these little niches and micro niches where things have evolved their place, and so they provide a tremendous amount of support for wildlife, plants and animals. But in addition to that, the important role they play for our fisheries. Now that we're moving into the next phase of human existence with climate change and such, we are really cognizant of the role they play in mitigating climate change, right?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of helping to store and sequester carbon, as well as just sort of generally providing a buffer for things like sea level rise, protecting surrounding communities during storm surges and other potential flooding events. Um, and they also provide economic value. So things like tourism and the role they play in our economy in terms of fisheries, the ability to filter and cleanse stormwater. So this is a great example of a system that does a great job at that. So they are able to actually just naturally treat stormwater or polluted water before it reaches its next, you know, uh,
Mm-hmm.
place, which typically for us is the ocean. So really, really incredible job of actually treating stormwater before it gets out to the ocean, and helping to make sure our oceans are cleaner as a result.
Yeah, that all makes a lot of sense. And like why we should really work to protect and restore all of this land.
Mm,
Obviously, the process to do that is very complicated
mm.
and
Oh yeah.
takes a lot of time. And I'm sure you know a lot about that. But I guess if you could break it down into like really simple phases, I
Hmm.
guess, what
Hmm.
does it usually take to get a project and get it approved and actually like implementing that?
Yeah, I mean, there's different types of different types of restoration, and so
Mm-hmm.
it depends on how complex of a project you're talking about, right? So
Right.
we do a lot of small small scale projects. Friends of Biona Wetlands does a lot of small scale projects where we're sort of working with 1 or 2 acres at a time. Um, Typically, a lot of the work with any restoration project happens before you even touch a plant or move a speck of dirt, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
so much of it goes into the planning phase where we're assessing a site, looking at what is there currently, so existing conditions, getting a baseline, um, understanding the soil and the soil chemistry, and understanding the historical ecology. So what was there in the past, what has happened that's led it to where it is today. Looking at the vegetation, right? So how much of it is invasive, how much of it is native, and then you go into like permitting. So working with our regulatory agencies like California
Mm-hmm.
Fish and Wildlife, and for us, Coastal Commission is always involved as well, and then there's also the funding part of it, right? So any
Right.
project you do, depending on how complex it is going to require some sort of grant funding or some sort of funding mechanism to ensure that we can complete it, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so typically we look at, for our projects, we think in terms of usually like 3 to 5 years of funding at minimum, right? And that
Mm-hmm.
that's we're usually in a position to do any kind of ongoing maintenance because we're working on land that we're very tied to as an organization, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
we're not one of these companies or groups or where you're moving around to different sites. Like we are very invested here, but thinking about long-term maintenance is really important. And then actually you get to doing the actual work,
Yeah.
right? Which is, oh, sorry.
It's okay.
um, so we do our monitoring work, we get our baseline. We do a lot of work that involves volunteers, community volunteers, right? So that's a
Right.
big part of our mission is getting the community involved in sort of the restoration process, literally getting hands dirty, removing invasive species, planting, all that kind of stuff. And then as a staff, we're doing the work to kind of monitor and collect the ongoing, vegetation data and all that kind of stuff, the science that kind of informs that work. And then part of this process I forgot to mention is that we set goals at the outset, right? What is our goal for what the site's going to look like at the end, and throughout the process you're kind of assessing as you go, and then incorporating that into what your next steps are, right? Because things don't always go exactly sometimes they go amazing and everything works out, and then other times you have to reassess and kind of think through what went wrong. A restoration like this at the freshwater mark is going to be very different from what we do as an organization. This is going to be a project that's going to be involving these big kind of physical changes and engineering process, right? Because you're moving and changing the way water flows, and that means ensuring that you're protecting the surrounding communities, ensuring so lots of engineers involved, lots of engineering and design plans that are approved by the Army Corps of Engineers and the various agencies that have to support that work and approve that work. So very, very different from the smaller scale projects that we're doing, but certainly this is a project that we've championed and are really proud of. That wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for us advocating for a big project like this.
Right.
Yeah.
And I guess that touches on like the difference between advocacy and being boots on the ground, doing the actual work and all of that. But either way, your organization plays a big role in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And one of the projects that I think is a really big success that you guys played a big part in is the El Segundo blue butterfly, and seeing that come back after so many years of working really hard to restore the wetlands. With that project, what do you think made it such a success over the years? Like what really went into it that allowed you guys to see this species come back, and that was such a pleasant surprise for everyone?
Yeah, no, it's a great question because it's somewhat mysterious, I guess. There is this element of luck. You always when you start a restoration project, you start restoring for the hope and the dream is that it will support rare and endangered species like the El Segundo blue butterfly, but you can't always count on that, right? Like it's something that you try to set the conditions that are optimal for native species generally, and you hope that the final result will be seeing rare and endangered things, very sensitive species like the butterfly. I think initially, this is long before I joined the organization, it was just like get native plants established, right? It came from a love and a passion for our native plants and our native ecosystems, and that was really just sort of the motivational force. And I think even at that time, it was assumed that the butterflies were going to there was going to be some sort of captive rearing type program where the butterflies would actually have to be brought and reintroduced physically by scientists or biologists who were involved with a program to help recover them. And what we have found, and I think this is true of our site was one of the first sites, restoration sites to see the butterflies come back, but pretty much anywhere where they're doing this, restoring this type of habitat, which for the El Segundo blue butterflies is coastal dune habitat, if they're planting the host plant, which is the sea cliff buckwheat, the butterflies have been showing up, which is really extraordinary. And so I do think it was a lot of it was that passion for the native ecosystems, but a lot of credit goes to the species itself for being much more resilient, much more mobile than I think anybody realized. A lot of the literature that if you read when they were first being studied and first being candidate species for Endangered Species Act, they're described as being very sedentary, and like in the scheme of things, they aren't like one of these migratory species that flies all over the place, right? They do stay relatively close range to where their habitat is. But clearly, I think we've discovered that the evidence points to the fact that they seem to be able to actually move around a lot more than people expected.
Right.
And so, because we're close enough to one of the other sites, which is the LAX dunes, which is, at least a mile, maybe a little bit more than a mile from where we have our habitat, the butterflies were able to find it. And I always tell people, like, all it would take is one female to or maybe a couple to make that to find that habitat and then lay a bunch of eggs, and then boom, you have this new population. And so I think that's probably what happened is because we had enough of the host plant. I don't know whether they can sense it or smell it, or maybe they just got lucky and they
Yeah.
flew in that direction and boom, there it was. I tend to give them a bit more credit than that. I feel like, my feeling, and it's just a feeling, right? I don't know that this has been studied yet, but my feeling is that they are able to, whether it's smell the host plant or somehow sense where it is, they're able to find it on their own. And
Yeah.
that's pretty cool. And I think it's for a teeny tiny little
Yeah, it's
butterfly. I
so
mean, even
small.
going a mile from LAX to where we are at Ballona, that's a long way, and so that's pretty incredible. And so again, as much as it was a passion project and a hope and a dream, I think a lot of the credit in this case goes to this really incredibly resilient species that was able to find us.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And then when it comes to like we're giving a lot of credit to the species being able to just find its way and spread back around if the conditions are right. When you're doing restoration like this, I feel like with plants there's a little bit more control because you can put the native plant in the ground. But have you seen difficulties of you're setting the stage for native species to come back, but that hasn't really been happening? And what would you change to try and fix that again? Or
Yeah, I mean, I think there are limits to being in such an urbanized area.
yeah.
Certainly, there's going to be species that are, you can do, even if this was restored back to, a even with like a really really comprehensive restoration, whatever that looks like, whatever, a really, let's just say, a comprehensive restoration, hundreds of $1 million are spent. There's going to be certain things that are going to be less likely to come back because of the lack of contiguous habitat. This is a weird example, but like a mountain lion, for example, they probably came here through here historically, right? This is probably some. It's just they're not gonna. It's too small and not enough prey, and it's not gonna work. So that's just a random example, but that kind of same process will hold true for certain species of birds, certain species of fish, and so I think that's part of like uh, as important as it is to preserve habitat here and to restore it. It's part of a process that has to happen all over Southern California, so that these native species have somewhere within that network of green spaces where hopefully they can thrive. And I think it's we can never get exactly back to pre 1900, let's say, conditions, or
Right.
even pre 1960s conditions, right? Like,
Yeah.
so much has changed with the watershed, with the hydrology, with the sediments, with the shoreline, with the way the beaches and the everything everything has really altered to a point where it's not about trying to get exactly back to that. It's about trying to get as much of that back as we can, and also accepting that, like, with 600 acres, there's limits to that. And so let's do the best with what we have, and also encourage for conservation and restoration in other places so that other species can thrive as well.
Yeah, awesome. And then one of the future projects you guys are thinking about that I think has started to be championed by a lot of people even across the country is focusing on supporting monarchs, as just because they travel so far, there's so many different places that they can go.
Mm-hmm.
And with that potential project that you guys are thinking of, are there certain lessons that you've learned from past projects that you might be trying to implement, whether positive or negative?
Yeah. So the Western monarch in particular is in pretty dire straits, and so it's very concerning, and so we're hopeful that we can do our small part here. I think it's a very different species than the El Segundo blue butterfly, for example, because of this tremendous migration that
Yeah.
they take. Sometimes it's a couple thousand miles or so from A to B, and we are B. Like we are the end of that migration, end of that process. And so they overwinter here, and then they go back to A, right?
Right.
And so all of that kind of space between us and and there where they will spend the summer, we don't have a lot of control of, right? So I
Right.
do think that is part of where advocacy and awareness and education comes into play, and so it's definitely that's something that we can do is develop that stewardship that can hopefully uh, uh, help with that other part of their life cycle. But here at the Ballona Wetlands, we do have a small eucalyptus grove that has historically supported a small population of overwintering monarchs. It's ranges over year to year how many are overwintering in the eucalyptus grove. So one of the things we want to do is ensure that eucalyptus grove is more resilient. In particular, we have and we've worked with partners on this, both support from California Fish and Wildlife as well as the SUSSY Society, which is a great organization that's doing a lot for monarch butterflies throughout their range. They are recommending that some restoration happens in particular, to address sort of the buildup of fuels around the eucalyptus grove that could potentially, in a wildfire type event, we would lose the entire thing, right? And so this is
Right.
one of those cases where when and if that eucalyptus grove is gone, it's gone forever, right?
Right.
Because those trees were planted probably in the early 1900s. It's not something that you can just you can plant the trees, right, but they're going to take
Time.
decades and decades to kind of mature to the stage, to the point where they can actually shelter butterflies.
Mm-hmm.
Because another thing is that we've learned from study, again, Xerces Society has done a lot of this work, is understanding why they are attracted to certain eucalyptus groves. And from what we can tell, it's sort of this combination of the shelter that they provide from wind, the windbreaks. So having the trees that are tall enough to have the roosting sites, but then also a windbreak. So again,
Mm-hmm.
once those are gone, they're gone forever. Like they
Yeah.
so we want to address the buildup of fuels in and around the grove to ensure that it continues to support monarchs. And then the other thing we want to do is in tangent with that is along this wintering area, so along the coast, what's encouraged is native nectar plants. So it's especially nectar plants that flower during the winter when they are here. That's another one of these educational things, is that yes, they need milkweeds specifically for the larval stage of the butterfly, but that's going to be on their migrations, right? So along the
Mm-hmm.
coast here, it's actually encouraged not to plant milkweed, and that's within about a mile to 5 miles of the coast, depending where you are in California. Rather than planting milkweed in that zone, you're encouraged to plant native nectar plants that are going to provide the food during the adult stage of the life cycle. Okay. And then it's kind of inland from us is where you want to plant the milkweeds, the native milkweeds, that will help with the migration. There's different generations that occur during that part of the life cycle. So a very exciting project, very different from what we're typically doing. We're going to partner with some great organizations to do a lot of the work in there. It's going to be a combination of removing invasive species, invasive grasses that are potential for fuel for wildfires, and as well as some of the buildup of fuels within the grove itself. And it's very sensitive work. We're going to have to be very, very careful, but we're really excited about doing our part here in this coastal zone, in this overwintering zone, to address what is this much larger issue of the decline of the monarchs in California. And so that's really exciting, and I'm really excited about that project in particular.
Yeah, that'll be really cool. And because it's different than what you guys are usually doing, it'll be such a good learning experience and broaden maybe the scope and stretch of the organization.
Absolutely, yeah.
But a big part of it, like you were mentioning, and of any restoration project and conservation, is the education side of things. So as someone that works with volunteers and interns and corporate partners and other organizations, how much do you think educational efforts really translate into action and mindset shifts for people who aren't already working at an organization like this?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. I do think it's foundational to everything that we do as an organization, right? Like it really is the core of who we are, is the importance of education. We do really focus on younger people.
Yeah.
A lot of our educational efforts are going towards elementary school, in particular elementary schools from LAUSD, Los Angeles Unified School District, and specifically the Title I schools. Those are going to be the lower income and the students that maybe don't have access to green spaces like this in their neighborhoods. So that's where we put a tremendous amount of our effort as an organization. We have a really incredible education staff, environmental education staff that are, doing field trips 3 days a week at least, and then are in classrooms doing pre and post lessons with a lot of these schools twice a week, so that they're getting these multiple touches. And then we also have partner schools, and this I think is really, really exciting part of our education program right now, where we are with some of these schools, we call them partner schools, and we're doing the pre and post lessons. We're doing bus scholarships so that the schools don't have to pay for the buses for the field trips, and then we're also seeing them at multiple grade levels. So, and then each grade level, they're getting a different curriculum that's aligned with the state science standards, and they're going to multiple locations. So they're doing Discovery Park when they're little, and then they're doing the freshwater marsh sometimes, and they're also doing the saltwater marsh, and so they're seeing multiple sites and seeing it as they age as well. And so I think that is really the model that we're moving towards, is like, rather than this one-time touch, you get your field trip and then we never see you again, being able to have that repeat contact, where they're learning these different concepts in concert with their classroom teaching, and then seeing it out in the field and on the field trip, and then back into the classroom and talking about it again, and then doing that the next year and the next year and the next year. I think that is really, our vision for what our education program is going to look like, and what we're trying to achieve there is developing that sense of stewardship, that those future scientists, those future environmental stewards and scientists, and or just maybe they go on to be an accountant, but they care about wetlands, or whatever it is. It's hopefully that sort of lifetime connection that's so important. And And yeah, something that we're very proud of, and I think that is just a great um, sort of vision for what environmental education looks like. Um, so yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, I think you did. And I think it's really cool to hear about how you guys are really investing in the education program with
Mm,
kids because, yeah, I feel like oftentimes education's like a one time touch and go kind of thing, but
yeah,
investing in them over the years and really building
yeah,
those relationships is actually really cool.
yeah. And I mean, I think that kind of to speak to the broader role of education, and I do think that it's you know I'm biased because you maybe don't hear from the people who see the place and then never think about it again. But I do all the time hear from people who are like, "Oh, I went to a field trip there when I was a kid, and now I'm studying this," or with my interns who are oftentimes just getting their first experience doing field work, and then they get to actually get their hands dirty and kind of do some of these concepts that they've learned about, but now they're actually doing it with the hands-on restoration work, and then that it inspires them to go on to working in restoration ecology or pursuing a master's degree in a related field and that kind of thing. So I don't know. I do feel like we're having a tremendous impact, and I'm it's nice.
Yeah, no, it's really cool. And you talked about what you do once you have the relationships to help people who don't necessarily have access to green spaces get
Mm,
there, like the bus program and
mm-hmm,
all of that. But when it comes to first getting that community contact or engagement with
mm.
people, is it like LAUSD is connecting you to the schools, or have you been seeking out certain schools? Do they reach out to you to try and get
Yeah.
involved?
I mean, I'd say that we do some outreach, but we have, we've been, our organization has been around since 1978, and the education program, even though it's developed over the years, has been around since, the mid 90s, when we started hosting field trips. And so there's a lot of momentum there and a lot of relationships that we've developed over the years. We now have, so one of my uh, former interns slash a former employee of the organization, I met her on a field trip when she was in high school, and she
Mhm.
asked if she could get more involved and do an internship. And so then she interned with me for over the summer and as well as with our education program. And then when she was in college, she was working part time for us, and she went through her master's program at LMU, and then worked full time for us when she graduated for a few years before she finally decided to go and become a teacher, which was her goal all along. And now she's bringing her students on field trips.
That's really cute.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And it is one of those full circle moments of
Mhm.
like she came for a field trip, and now she is the teacher bringing her elementary school students on a field trip. And so I think that is a great example of just how invested we are in our community, in the that we're actually we're hitting this point of like generational,
Yeah.
like my kids went on a field trip, or I went on a field trip, and now my kids are going on, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
Or young teachers who went on field trips. So I do think that tells some of the story right there. And so yeah, and so we do have these wonderful relationships with these schools that we've worked with for years, that we've just been able to grow and develop into even better relationships with the partner
Hmm.
school program. We still do outreach events at tablings and things like that, and so we're you know one of the things that we've been able to do is actually grow our capacity a little bit. So we're um, we're basically, I would say, at this point, in terms of how much our small little staff can handle, we're almost like
Hmm.
at capacity. We have to turn schools away sometimes because we just
Yeah.
don't have dates, and enough staff to do all of the field trips we would like to do. So that
Hmm.
goes to show that we're doing something right, but also the need for um, more funding and more
Yeah.
more staff so that we can do even more and reach even more people.
Yeah. And we're talking a lot about other people getting connected to the wetlands and wanting to pursue this restoration and the need for more people to do that. But you're one of the people that has come to serve this role in the community and in the ecosystem of Los Angeles. But what initially attracted you to native ecosystems and conservation and environmentalism in general?
Yeah. Um, so my story was kind of is kind of, you know, windy a little bit because I didn't know what I wanted to do until I really started to do it, which I guess makes sense. But you know, my connection to the wetlands is a lifelong connection because I grew up in the neighborhood, and so I did have the opportunity, the blessing really, to grow up next to this incredible green space, right? And so as a kid, that meant being able to kind of walk around the edges of it and, you know, play in the fields and especially up on, you know, the bluff above the wetlands is kind of where a lot of my friends lived, and so. So yeah, so there was that kind of lifelong connection and that you know, I guess that appreciation that came from that. Um, but and then for my undergrad, I went to school in Vancouver, British Columbia. So I moved from LA to Vancouver, to Canada. And I was there for 4 years at the University of British Columbia. And Vancouver is an extraordinary city. And that really actually was important, not because of what I studied necessarily, but because of it exposed me to a place that has done a much better job, I would say, of kind of balancing sort of the urban and the natural with these incredible parks throughout the city, as well as just like just outside of the city is just this incredible, almost sort of wilderness with, you know, mountains and beaches and, you know, just a really, really beautiful place to spend 4 years. But my undergraduate degree was I majored in English literature and political science. And I was very interested in the environmental policy initially. I thought that was kind of be sort of the direction I wanted to go, was more in the political world or the policy world, really. But when I moved back to LA, I was lucky to get a job with Heal the Bay, and I worked there as their coastal cleanup day coordinator and managing that event. That led me to Friends of Ballona Wetlands originally, and when I originally started with them, I was working more on kind of policy stuff, but also really kind of like sort of development stuff, like managing our website and our social media and things like that, and helping with some fundraising stuff and like really kind of that side of things. And then at that point, I started helping out when they needed extra help with the restoration work, and it was like the, you know, you know, bolt of lightning. Oh my gosh, this is what I want to do moment.
Yeah.
And I had to do a lot of work to kind of fill in the gaps in my formal education to, you know, workshops and trainings and amazing mentors that I was able to find who you know helped guide me but it was you know immediate that you know I became so passionate about native plants, about our native wildlife, about the native ecosystems of Los Angeles, and just spent a lot of time, you know, filling in those gaps, and was eventually able to get hired to do that with Friends of Ballona Wetlands, and I've been doing it ever since.
Yeah, that's actually awesome. And I feel like for restoration and environmental work in general, there's a common perception, which is just because a lot of people have a lot of formal education before they go and do this. So it's really cool to hear that you were educated, but you found something different from what you studied that you really wanted to pursue. And I guess if someone maybe wanted to also pivot or learn a new skill or gain different expertise, do you have advice for finding resources, getting mentorship like you were talking about?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I think finding, you know, the hardest part of it, I think, is getting your foot in the door, right? And so that does mean, figuring out ways to do internships and volunteer work, which is oftentimes, this is sort of the unpaid kind of it's hard, and not everyone can afford to do that. But I think the other part of that is just for me, it was just spending as much time as possible out in nature, right? Because you can I read a lot of books, and I I bought all the field guides, and I did all that stuff too. But you learn by doing,
right?
And so, sorry, I'm going to interrupt us. I don't know if we can get this, but see the kite up
Whoa,
there?
yeah.
Sorry. Oh, there it is. There it is. That's the kite. So you can see why they call them kites.
Yeah.
One of my favorite birds. So that's like one of those moments, right?
Yeah.
You spend time out in nature, and you get to see that kind of thing, and it is really critical just to do as much time as you can just learning in the field, from doing the work, from even just like going on hikes and walks and things like that, looking at plants and seeing them, how they change over the seasons and with time, and I think, and then learning, and then you have to go back and do like some of the formal stuff and read the books and take the classes and all that, but you learn so much just by spending time out here, and that you can't quantify it or replicate it with, like, what is going on here with all these gulls flying by all of a sudden.
So you've been at Ballona for some time, Friends of Ballona for some time now, and like you've seen the organization grow a lot, and you've also played a role in helping it grow and expand in terms of getting more interns, growing the partnership with the California Climate Action Corps, and getting more people from them to come help. And for you, from your perspective, how has the organization been able to keep growing?
Oh gosh, yeah.
And I'll start with that.
Yeah, I mean, so much of that credit goes to our executive director, Scott, and our board of directors, who are extremely supportive and generous with their time and with their money. I think that's kind of the foundation, is having people who really understand our mission, and want to support us. And I do think something that I am aware of a lot of time in the nonprofit world is that there's a lot of passion and great ideas, and just like the motivation to change the world and make the world a better place, but not always the follow through in terms of how to actually make that happen, and how to make it sustainable, right? And because these are long-term visions, right? These are things that you can't do overnight, right? It takes investment, it takes time and energy, and oftentimes the money runs out, or people burn out, right? And that's a big problem in nonprofits, where there's turnover and there's burnout and that kind of thing. So I think it is about having a vision, and also being able to find people and organizations to support that work financially. So I do think it is about sort of both having short-term plans for how to do your work, but also a long-term vision in terms of how to make it sustainable, how to fund it, how to find donors and funders to support that work, and developing those relationships. And it's a lot of time and it's a lot of energy, but it really is critical to one of the things Scott, our executive director, always says is, nonprofit is I'm going to butcher this now that nonprofit is a tax status, right? But it's like, it's a business,
right?
In terms of like having employees and a payroll and all that other stuff. Like, you have to be able to run it like a business, and take care of people, right? Because if if you're not, then people leave, people burn out, people, all that kind of stuff. So I think that's a really important part of it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. When you brought up the passion, led me to the same train of thought that you pretty much just went through, where the passion is such a strength at a lot of nonprofits. But yeah, like making that passion into action and making it sustainable and having people actually stay on board because they can or they want to.
Yeah.
And you, like we said before, like have been here a long time, and you've talked about how the organization has been able to keep growing and be sustainable and support its people. But how have you personally, as someone who's been in the nonprofit space, and sometimes the work in the environmental sector can feel very urgent and very tiring, and what have you done to stay inspired and motivated and passionate?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like a couple things. Like work-life balance is incredibly important, right?
Yeah.
And it's you can't do the work if you're not also taking care of yourself, right?
Yeah.
I know it's like elder statesman voice, but it's true. I think what for me is so important, like this is like an incredible classroom, and I do feel like I am lucky to have a job where I'm still constantly learning new things, right? It really hasn't gotten boring yet. I still feel like I'm constantly able to learn and grow and develop new skills. You mentioned the California Climate Action Corps, so that's something that we are very proud to be a part of. This year we're hosting 4 fellows. Last year we had 2. That was our first year with the program. That has been incredible experience to have people embedded in our organization for 11 months full time, and to be able to both help us as an organization, expand and do more good work. But I think for our fellows, this incredible opportunity to gain new skills and connections and develop their resumes and network and just grow as as new people new to this industry and to the work. So it very much is like a two-way street, and that's something that I'm really proud of and grateful for. So grateful for our fellows, and grateful for the program, hoping that we can continue to be a part of that for future years. And so that's been kind of my newest part of my job is now managing 4 people who are just doing tremendous work, helping with our restoration projects, and working with our volunteers and all that kind of stuff. So so yeah, again, for me, it is a combination of like making sure you're taking care of yourself, but also making sure you're also always challenged, always learning new things. I mean, Ballona is a very complicated place. And so like I almost every day something happens, I'm like, whoa, I didn't expect that to happen, or like I did not see that coming, or whoa, I've never seen that. So for better or for worse, right? It keeps you on your toes, keeps things interesting. It's never dull, as I like to say. It's never a dull day around here, and but so often it's really positive and incredible things. So grateful for that.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And as people are listening or learning about the wetlands and Friends of Ballona Wetlands, how do you think people can support native habitats and native flora and fauna as individuals if they're not able to do this as their job?
Yeah, I mean, for me, like what I always like to tell people is like, they're kind of getting into native plants and native ecosystems is, I feel like there is sort of a steep learning curve, but then once you hit this certain point, it opens up this whole new world, right? Where you are, for me, it makes reality, just the day-to-day living as a human being, so much more interesting and so much more vivid, where, it's just being, going for a walk in the neighborhood, you start to notice things that you just didn't notice before. And the more you understand, you dig into those things, you realize that, this bird is here in this neighborhood because that tree is there in that neighborhood. Somebody decided to plant an oak tree and now it's got certain types of songbirds that are so that's starting to make those connections. So I think that's like step one, is just starting to gain that knowledge and appreciation, and then step two, I'd say, would be figuring out where you can do your part. And so that could be something as simple as like maybe you live in an apartment building, and so you don't have access to a garden but maybe you could put some pots out on your balcony that are gonna provide plant some native plants in your pots, and they're providing nectar for hummingbirds or for native pollinators. Those little micro habitats, I guess.
Yeah.
I think can be an important contribution, right? This is like we're in this biodiversity crisis, right? And like even little things like that aren't little, right? I think it's just, and what I would also say is that, like, even anywhere where you are in the entire world, there are a set of plants there that are regionally appropriate, that evolve there, that have these critical roles to play. And so learning about that, and then figuring out what's your local green space. Is there a park or a river or a wetlands nearby? And then just going for a walk, trying to get involved, seeing what's going on there, and how you can play a role, I think would be amazing.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And for people that want to learn more, so I guess we just talked about the engagement part of things and getting out there, but people who want to up their education side of things and their knowledge base, do you have any resources that you would recommend for restoration or wetlands in specific?
Yeah. So I always encourage people to check out their local California Native Plant Society chapter, or look for local events with your Native Plant Society group. Sometimes they do walks or workshops or hikes or anything like that, or restoration days. I think that's a great start for kind of getting to know other people as well. Finding community, I think, is incredibly important. We're all living in our little digital worlds with and so getting outside and actually meeting people, I think, is an incredible way to get more involved. Specifically for Friends of Ballona Wetlands. I think I think we pretty much offer some way for people to get involved, whether it's just coming out for a tour, right? We have public events, public tours, multiple times a month. Almost every weekend there's some kind of tour going on, either at the freshwater marsh or the salt marsh. We have multiple volunteer restoration days a month. We have one creek cleanup day a month. We also have our native our gardening club days twice a month at Discovery Park, where that's a bit more, it's a park setting, so it's a great way to kind of get to know sort of our native plants that way. So lots of volunteer opportunities. And then for people who really want to get involved, we also have a docent program. So becoming getting trained and getting to be able to help us provide tours, and actually get on that side of things, where you're actually the expert, and you're telling people about the birds and the plants and all that kind of stuff. So that's another way. So yeah, lots of opportunities, and hopefully people check us out.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I guess to close us out, do you have one big takeaway or piece of advice that you would really want to leave people with?
Oh gosh.
It's hard, so if you don't, it's okay.
No, I mean, I guess I'll go back to what I'll repeat myself a little bit, but I encourage people to I really encourage people to get to know your native plants, get to know your native ecosystems. It makes life so much more rich and so much more interesting, and opens up so many doors, and creates community. And there's just so much value in understanding, or just starting to understand. The learning process is so enriching that you don't have to be an expert to really get so much out of learning more about these things. And yeah, it's a great way to just make life more interesting and more fun, and it's again, it's never dull.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
You're so welcome. My pleasure.